Tonight, you will die. The cold and menacing voice of the man echoed through the darkness, sending a shiver down Elena's spine. She turned frantically, searching for an escape, but the narrow alley left no way out. Raindrops pattered against the pavement in the dimly lit alley. Just beyond this place was a lively city street, yet at this moment, not a single soul was in sight. Her voice trembled. What do you want?" The man stepped closer, his gaze sharp like that of a predator. In his hand, a gleaming knife caught the weak flicker of the streetlight. Elena staggered back, her hands fumbling for anything to defend herself. Her throat went dry, and her heart pounded violently. "You shouldn't do this. I haven't done anything wrong." The man let out a sinister chuckle, stepping forward again. "You think you're innocent? Leaving your rich husband to run away with a lover? Did you think you could escape judgment?" With a swift motion, he raised the knife. The cold blade nearly grazed her skin. Elena screamed and instinctively threw herself backward, narrowly dodging the strike. Suddenly, a loud cry shattered the tension. The attacker faltered, his body staggering backward. Blood splattered onto the ground. Elena gasped for air, her hands trembling as she clutched herself. She had barely escaped death, but who had saved her? From the shadows, a man emerged, his long coat obscuring most of his face. His voice was deep and raspy. "The consequences of your past have yet to be repaid. You won't escape so easily." Elena pushed herself up from the ground, her vision blurred. Memories, long buried, surfaced in fragmented flashes. She recognized this man, but how did he know so much about her? Regaining her composure, she stared at him. Her mind retraced the past, the choices that had led her to this moment. "Where did it all begin?" she whispered, just as an unexpected figure from her past stepped into the story, shifting the entire course of events. Elena's blood ran cold as she gazed at the man before her. "Who are you?" she wondered, but dared not ask aloud. The man narrowed his eyes and smirked. "Do you truly not remember me?" A sudden dizziness washed over her. That familiar face. It was someone she thought had vanished from her life forever. "No, this can't be," she stammered, instinctively stepping back. "Welcome back to reality, Elena." His voice carried a bitterness that made her skin crawl. How could she ever forget the man who had turned her life into a tragic play? Elena felt danger creeping in, an overwhelming fear gripping her. She needed an escape, but every path was blocked. "I never thought we would meet again like this." Her voice wavered, tears welling in her eyes. The man stepped closer, his gaze no longer filled with hatred alone, but with a deep sorrow she couldn't comprehend. "Some things are inevitable, and this is the consequence of your choices?" Elena shut her eyes, her throat tightening as silent tears escaped. She knew this moment would change her life forever. The man raised his knife high, then abruptly stopped. Why did you stop?" Elena gasped, looking at him in shock. The man exhaled deeply and let the knife drop to the ground. "Because I still love you." Elena's breath hitched. A cold wave of emotions washed over her. The man before her, he was no longer the same as the figure in her memories. "Who are you really?" she asked, voice trembling. He curled his lips into a faint smile, his fingers brushing over the knife before resting it against her shoulder. "I am the one you abandoned." Elena's entire body froze. Her mind shattered into fragments of memories she had buried deep, now all resurfacing at once. Her heart clenched painfully. She had never imagined she would face someone she had once erased from her past, and now, this was the price she had to pay for her mistakes. She dropped to her knees, tears cascading down her face. She had no words, only regret-filled eyes staring at him. "Why did we come to this?" she choked out. The man gazed at her, his expression unreadable before sighing. "Because we made the wrong choices." Elena gazed at her trembling hands, her mind overwhelmed with pain and regret. She had never imagined that the choices she made in the past would lead her to this moment. Will you ever forgive me?" she asked between broken sobs. The man looked at her, his heart tightening. Slowly, he stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You chose your path, and now you must face the consequences. His voice was calm, yet heavy with sorrow. Tears fell. Elena knew there was no way back. She could only accept the truth and live with what she had done. She knelt, pressing her face into her hands, feeling the rawness of pain and remorse. She had thought she could escape the consequences, but time had only proven how wrong she was. Did you really think you could run? His voice was quiet, yet it cut like a blade. She lifted her teary eyes. I never wanted it to be this way. The past could not be changed. And then, the man did something no one could have expected. He let go of the knife. Fate has already decided, Elena. I just want you to remember, we once loved each other. She collapsed into sobs as buried memories rushed back. And as the door closed behind him, she knew they would never meet again. Years later, Elena returned to her hometown, tears streaming down her face as she walked through the familiar streets. No matter how many times she came back, the past would never change. The scars in her heart were deeper than any wound on her body. She didn't know if she could ever forgive herself, but one thing was certain: she would never forget. The years had passed, but Elena could never erase the painful memories. She wandered the streets that held so many moments of joy and sorrow. She entered an old cafe, one where she and him had once met. The familiar scent of coffee lingered, but the taste had changed. She ordered a black coffee, bitter and strong, sipping it as if tasting the past itself. Elena! She flinched and turned around. Before her stood a young man, his eyes filled with curiosity. Do you remember me? Elena stared at him, and for a brief moment, memories from 10 years ago flooded back. She closed her eyes, her heart skipping a beat. It was the boy from the past, the one she thought she had forgotten. The young man smiled warmly. You've been through so much. Are you ready to come home? Elena was stunned. The boy she once knew had grown into a man, carrying both maturity and sorrow in his eyes. Is it really you? She whispered, her voice shaking. He nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. I've been looking for you for so long. You know, we can still start over. Elena froze. For years, she believed she had no chance left to make things right. But now standing before her was a hand reaching out, offering her another chance. She thought about everything she had lost, all the mistakes she had made. Would she dare take this final opportunity? The young man extended his hand, just like he did when they were children. Do you want to come home? Elena clenched her eyes shut, her tears soaking her lips. She reached out and took his hand. Elena slowly stepped out of the cafe, still holding on to the young man's hand. For the first time in years, her heart beat to a different rhythm. Will you stay this time? He asked, his voice filled with hope. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and nodded softly. I think it's time to face my past and find a new beginning. She felt the warmth of his hand in hers. After years of being lost, she had finally found a place to return to. Elena walked down the cold street, feeling the first rays of sunlight kiss her skin. The pain of the past remained, but she knew she had a chance to live a different life. I'll always be here for you, the young man whispered, his eyes sincere. She smiled faintly and quickened her steps. For the first time, she felt at peace. A new beginning. In the days that followed, Elena tried to start over. She took a job at a small cafe in town, leading a simple life. Every morning, she opened the shop, greeted customers, and served coffee with a gentle smile. No one in this small town knew the stormy past she carried, but the past never truly lets go. One evening, as she wiped the cafe tables, a familiar voice echoed behind her. I never expected to find you here, Elena. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. It was Alexander, the man she had once abandoned. He stood there, his sharp gaze unwavering, his lips curled into an unreadable smirk. The fear she once knew returned, making her instinctively take a step back. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice dry. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving hers. I always wondered how someone like you would move on after everything you did. And now, I have my answer. Elena gripped the cloth in her hand tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. I just want to live in peace. I have nothing to do with you anymore." Alexander chuckled softly. "Do you really think it's that simple? That you can just walk away from the consequences of your actions?" She bit her lip, unable to reply. Alexander took a slow sip of his coffee, then leaned closer. "Some mistakes can never be undone, Elena, and you will have to pay the price." For days, Elena didn't see Alexander again, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Every time she walked down the street, she felt unseen eyes following her. Every night she jolted awake, her heart pounding. One late evening, as she locked up the cafe, her blood ran cold. A car was parked across the street. The headlights blinked once, a signal she knew too well. Elena stood frozen. She knew she couldn't run forever. Taking a deep breath, she walked straight toward the car. The window rolled down slowly, revealing Alexander's cold gaze. "Get in!" His voice was firm. She hesitated, but then opened the door and stepped inside. The car drove away, vanishing into the night. They stopped near a deserted riverbank. Alexander turned off the engine and faced her. "Did you ever think about the consequences of leaving me, Elena?" She clenched her hands in her lap, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I was wrong, but I can't change the past. I just want to live." Alexander laughed bitterly. "Live? After everything you've done, do you think you deserve that?" She didn't answer. He pulled out a gun, placing it on the dashboard. "Some mistakes can only be repaid in blood." Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her face. She knew this could be her last moment. But then, something inside her shifted. She had nothing left to lose. She looked up at Alexander, no longer afraid. "If you want to kill me, do it." Her voice was firm. Alexander stared at her, his grip tightening around the gun. But after a long silence, he sighed and lowered it. "You're not worth it." He opened the door. "Leave, and don't ever come back." Elena didn't hesitate. She ran without looking back. 1 year later, Elena moved to another city, building a quiet life. She opened a small bakery, finding peace in making warm, fresh bread every day. She was no longer the woman she used to be. The past had scarred her, but it had also made her stronger. One evening, as she locked up her shop, a familiar voice called out, "Elena." She turned. It was him. "I've finally found you," he said, smiling. She gazed at him for a long moment, then finally smiled back. "Are you ready to come home?" Elena took a deep breath. Then she nodded. This time she would not run away. What do you think about this story? If you were Elena, which path would you choose? Leave a comment to share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next exciting stories.